Good evening. I'm not too formal, so just as a forewarning, if you guys have questions as I'm going about, please just ask. I'd rather do that than present sterilely. But anyhow, I'm Nathan Franzen, Director of Solar for Geronimo. Tonight we're going to cover what we call the new era of distributed solar projects. And you don't need to know about me, but done quite a few solar projects around the state and the country. Originally developed the St. John's project about 4 years ago, and from there started Westwood Professional Services PV plant design group with Mario Monasterio, who's still there. Did a lot of work on engineering and project development side for a lot of major contractors throughout the United States. I then joined Geronimo about a year and a half ago to start their solar division. I think we have a slide on Geronimo here. So about Geronimo is actually my first topic. And I'm going to hit on the Aurora Solar project, the process that we went through, and then the Minnesota PUC decision and kind of where that's going. So I actually got a little bit ahead of myself. So Geronimo is actually based not too far from here, right in Edina. We're this year proud to say we're the fourth largest wind developer in the United States. Signed about 1,000 megawatts of PPAs. We have about 36 employees spread out throughout the Midwest, from basically Michigan to North and South Dakota, and then 3 in Illinois. And we essentially focus on project development, so we acquire land, go through the permitting process, and then work to acquire power purchase contracts to sell power, and then we take it to investors to invest in our projects. So we do have a major investor of a company called Enel Green Power, and they're a large, they're actually the utility of Italy, but they also own power plants throughout the whole world, so they have about 800 power plants that they own and operate. So as we develop projects, we tee them up and bring them to investors like Enel to invest into the projects. We focus on the wind side primarily only on large-scale utility wind, and then on the solar front we do commercial rooftop portfolios. Last year we did 10 solar land stores here in the metro area, and then also obviously we focus on the utility scale market. And we primarily focus on the Midwest, so we're trying to stay within the, basically from the Dakotas to Michigan and down to about Nebraska is kind of our sandbox that we play in. So, I know most people are wanting to hear about the Aurora project. It is a 100 megawatt project. It's located in 16 counties. It's proposed to be constructed in the 2015 to 2016 timeline. Right now there's about 24 sites actually that are proposed through the process. Total cost is around $250 million, and the total tax revenue, this is also pending legislation that is still actually hung up in the Senate right now to clean up some tax issues around solar, but if that goes through, it'd be around $240,000 in local tax revenue paid out as a production tax. And we bid it as having a commercial operation date of December of 2016, kind of just before the expiration of the federal ITC. And I'll get into a lot more specifics here, but that's kind of the big overview. The map on the right shows you the counties that it's located in, and essentially follows Xcel's service territory. They basically serve all the small cities throughout the corridors. So if you go out the 212 corridor, or the I-90 corridor, things like that, they serve a lot of the small towns. So what we did is took these small projects, and the project to the right is actually an aerial of St. John's, which is a 0.5 megawatt just for scale. And we found sites spread throughout Xcel service territory. And on average, we're about a half a mile from the Xcel substation. And we were able to find land that worked from both a price standpoint, being far enough away from the cities. A lot of these substations in small towns were fairly close to town, so we tried to find land just far enough away from town. And so we're connecting directly to the distribution system instead of to the transmission system. So this is kind of the whole basis of this project, was that we're delivering power directly to the community instead of delivering it to the transmission system. So if you have your normal power plant, you're interconnecting at 115 volts or even higher, 230, 500, depending on the size. All of our projects will be interconnected at 12 kV or 34 kV, so very low voltage that already exists. And we saw that as having a very big strategic advantage in both, basically in economics. That's what it comes down to. In order to win, as we went through the process, we had to prove why we were more valuable through the process. The accreditation and the capacity is something I'm going to touch quite a bit on, because it's kind of it's a hard thing to understand, actually. As many times as I explain it to people, even it's a hard concept. And basically, power plants have two things we sell. It's energy, which is the kilowatt hours that you use in your house, and then there's a piece of paper called accredited capacity. And all that really is the ability to meet the peak demand during the summer. So every power plant has a different accreditation capacity. So on one end, you have a wind farm that's accredited to about 13%. So essentially, it's saying it's statistically reliable to be on peak about 13% of the time. And on the other hand, you have a gas peaking plant or a coal plant that's upwards of 90% is going to be operational. But we know that no plant is 100% reliable. The polar vortex is a good example of that, when a nuke plant and a couple coal plants and that went down, and it was actually wind propping up the system throughout the whole Midwest. And a little secret that a lot of people like to talk about is we were importing power from Mexico during that time in order to balance our power needs. So what we were bidding into, and we bid into the competitive resource acquisition process, was for capacity. It wasn't for energy. So we were bidding as a reliable resource to meet the peak need, not necessarily just to provide energy. Because obviously wind is a lot cheaper in terms of just providing energy. So I'm going to move on. So our unique design and benefits. Talked a little bit about the line loss, but we'll talk a little more. So normal losses from a power plant to your house is about 10%. So if you inject at the distribution system that's kind of serving your local community, you save about half of that. So from if you're selling for $1 at one end, if you deliver it at the house, you basically have $1.04 in value, because you've eliminated the losses. The other advantage that we thought was the geographic diversification of just generation assets. So similar to the example used in the polar vortex, by having 24 sites or 25 sites, if one power plant goes down, you're only losing a tenth or 5% of the overall power plant. So and that's one of the reasons why the state policy promotes distributed generation, is that when you have more power plants spread throughout the region, you have less grid fluctuation, and you're able to ride through power losses. A lot of brownouts happen when you have power plants tripping off. So if you have a scaling effect, it actually builds on itself, whereas if you have distributed generation spread out throughout the region, you kind of stop the brownout from rolling. The elimination of transmission costs is also a big item. So by delivering to the local communities, we're also able to eliminate the use of the transmission system. It's a fairly straightforward concept. If we're delivering power right to the town, we don't need the transmission system. You need it in a sense that we need it for overall grid stability, but there's a certain level of power you can inject into a local community, and that was part of our process as we went through. We analyzed each substation to figure out the load in each community and what was the approximate amount of power we could directly inject into that community without backfeeding onto the transmission system. So in doing that, we're essentially deferring, future needs. We're currently building CapEx lines across the state. This particular project is going to help to reduce the need to do that again. So we may be able to utilize our transmission system in a much more dynamic fashion in the future as we get more and more distributed generation on the system. So, and it's a very, transmission is a very expensive thing to have and operate. So by not using it is a huge help. So talk about the accreditation process. In order to bid into the RFP that we did bid into, we had to do the math and make sure we knew exactly what we were going to get. And MISO is essentially the grid operator for the upper Midwest, from roughly what we described in terms of the areas we work in, from the Dakotas all the way over to Michigan. And they essentially operate the grid. They're the ones that call power plant operators and tell them to turn on or off, if they need more power. And they determine or credit each type of generational resource and essentially test or have a way to determine the credited capacity. Well, yes, sir.
I was physically speaking when you said we got power from Mexico. How did we travel all the way from Mexico to some high voltage power?
That was actually Texas was bouncing from Texas itself. The ERCOT system was being balanced partially from power from Mexico. So there's 3 or 4 major grid systems in the United States. They're partially connected, and we're trying to make it more connected than it is.
So sometimes engineering and computerized process.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so MISO has a method for what they call non-wind intermittent resources, which is wind they have their own accreditation process, but for anything else that's intermittent, they basically look at how much you operate during the hours of 1 to 3 p.m. during the months of June, July, August. And this is all makes sense if you think about it. When do we need a lot of electricity? It's when it's really hot, when it's really sunny, and it's during the summer, and it's during the afternoon. So that is our peak. You may hear utilities talk about their winter peaking utility, or their peaks are later in the day, and that is true. Those are their specific utilities peak. But what matters to all of us, all the utilities and all of us as ratepayers, is when the grid peaks, because that's when all of us need power at the same time. And that happens during the hours of 1 to 3 p.m. during the months of June, July, and August. So what we did is we took the St. John's solar farm data, the last 3 years of data, and pulled data from that, analyzed it as to what it was doing, and it comes in at about 71% of its AC rating. We also then took NREL data, which you can get from various resources. They have met stations spread throughout the Minnesota where you can pull weather data for decades, and lo and behold, it was 71%. So it's very predictable, very accurate. Obviously, you'll have fluctuations year to year, but we were very happy to see that both the St. John's facility was operating exactly as how we've modeled it. So that was our.
So maybe when you say we analyzed it, so did MISO accept your analyzation, or did they go to a third party? And
we Geronimo analyzed it and hired third-party experts to verify our analysis. So it's.
This was side-by-side comparison with the gas plants they wanted to buy or build.
I'm going to get there. Yep. Good question. And obviously, cost was a big piece. We have no fuel cost compared to other systems. I'm not sure what I'm missing out about them, but I'll So, how did we get to having an approved project? So, this is kind of the backstory as to the whole RFP process. So, the PUC determined that Xcel needed somewhere around 500 megawatts of capacity in the 2017 to 2019 timeline. Xcel had originally proposed to build their Black Dog facility. When they did that, the PUC essentially said, well, how do we know that's competitive in terms of price and a good deal for the ratepayers? Why don't you go out to the market and see what other people will offer? So the need was specifically for peaking and intermediate capacity, which we talked about as this kind of that summer need. And because Xcel was participating, essentially to remove the bias, they asked the PUC to have an administrative law judge essentially handle this proposal process. So they posted notices and said anybody who wants to build power plants, come bid by April of last year. And there were 5 bidders that did so. And we'll dig into them. So what was proposed? Xcel had actually 3 combustion turbines. And just so you guys are, a combustion turbine is when we essentially only used for peak resources, so they turn on roughly 7% a year. They call upon it to flip the switch and they turn it on. They're cheap in terms of providing that reliability during the summer, but they're very expensive from a running perspective on a per megawatt hour because you're only turning them on a few times a year. They're expensive to start up, but they have that ability to turn on during the summer. Calpine proposed Invenergy proposed a similar type facility, combustion turbine. Calpine proposed a 345 megawatt expansion to the Mankato Energy Center, which is a combined cycle. Typically, combined cycles run a lot more. They're a little bit more efficient of a natural gas facility. You'll probably see a lot more combined cycle in the future as we go to replace larger coal plants. But essentially, they run more often, around 20% of the time, and therefore they have a lower operating cost. And then GRE bid paper, which, yes, sir.
In the days that I worked on combustion turbines, we ran about 10 to 12% efficient. Do you know is that a current number?
I don't know off the top. And then GRE bid basically paper. They said, we're not going to provide any energy, we're just going to give you a piece of paper that says you can have our accredited capacity, that they had excess on their system. So very interesting bids all over the board, from someone who offering just a piece of paper saying you can have my accredited capacity, to combustion turbines, combined cycle, and then last was our Aurora Solar project that was the 100 megawatt project. So this judge, Mr. Lippman, reviewed all of our bids and made sure they were complete. And then we essentially have what's a trial. You have lawyers, you go to a room and you argue your case. You submit briefs as to why you believe your project should be the best. You then get to reply and say, no, theirs is horrible, ours is better. You go back and forth, and in the process you spend a lot of money on attorneys. And he kind of determined that Xcel's actual need is a little uncertain. He deemed that the Aurora Solar project was the most economical option. He did that based on 2 reasons. One is a modeling software that basically takes everyone's bids and models the total cost over a period of time, and it spits out a number. So you model all these different combinations to see if Geronimo's bid with the Black Dog plant is better than the combined cycle plant with a CT. So they basically run every possible combination in the modeling software. And then they also do, there's just a simple test, which is what's your cost of energy over the life of the system. And solar won that hands down in terms of just overall cost. That gets back to that whole idea of you're only flipping this. If you build a CT, you only turn it on 7% a year. So it's upwards of $150 to $300 a megawatt hour just to run that project, whereas the solar was much less. So a couple different ways to look at it. What's interesting about the strategist model is our project did not fit into the model. This is really the first time in the country that someone has bid a distributed solar project into what is usually a transmission-only game. So it was, frankly, it was difficult for the modelers to understand how to deal with us because we didn't fit in the box. We had to make, adjustments had to be made because things like line loss exist. Those are true values. Transmission value does exist. And obviously, it was an interesting process, to say the least. One thing Strategist does do is take into account environmental costs. there's a state rule, so each bidder was assigned a certain cost based on old rules for carbon. I think we're going to see those change and go dramatically up in the future, but that's just my opinion. And last, the judge found that our project, the Aurora project, was scalable, and really a key component of our benefit to ratepayers was the fact that we could bring it on in pieces or in phases and not commit to a very large power plant before we know if we actually need it. And I think you'll see smaller distributed projects valued a lot more because of that ability to come on in smaller pieces. One of the things I argued about why this was so important, kind of not during the what we'll call the trial, but just to people in general, is that as a solar developer, we want the ability to have need. We want utilities to need power to build new projects. Well, if you build a 1,000 megawatt nuclear plant, well, guess what? They're not going to need anything for a long time, and they can come back to the industry, like from a solar perspective, and say, we don't need your solar power. So to have a scalable generation force is much better in terms of rolling out renewable power, because renewable plays much better in being able to bring on small pieces instead of overbuilding and then waiting for the market to catch up to all that usage we need. So. The recommendation specifically from the judge was that the renewable preference was warranted. Essentially, state law says that you have to prove that the renewable choice is not in the public interest. So you'd have to prove that our project was somehow bad for the public, which usually means money or cost. He did not deem that. So basically, if there's a tie, the renewable project will win. And he also found that some of the gas proposals are not fully vetted, so there's a couple of things unknown, issues with non-firm gas, unresolved interconnections. And this basically gets down to not offering a fixed price, whereas our proposal had everything. We assumed all risk to ratepayers, so if interconnection costs were higher, we bear that burden. So our fuel cost was easy to figure out because it's nothing. I think this fixed price idea is going to be something you'll see more of in the future as well. He also found that the Aurora project will help meet numerous state goals. Obviously, we have greenhouse gas reduction goals that we're trying to meet. We have renewable portfolio standards to meet. At the time when we bid this project, the solar standard wasn't adopted, so it was prior to that when we went into this bid last April. And then he also found that if the PUC deemed we needed additional power in the future, that we should work with Great River Energy to kind of bridge the gap. So the judge definitely leaned on the idea of scalable and just doing what we need to get by. And we'll see that the PUC didn't necessarily agree with the judge. So that was in December. So we went through this whole trial like atmosphere, and the judge wrote an opinion on December 31st. It was very fun. We got to open champagne. Well, right, it was perfect timing for the new year. The next step was really just happened a couple weeks ago, which was the Public Utility Commission picked up the docket, and they essentially take the judge's recommendation, and they can either accept it, modify it, or throw it in the trash. And they do that by offering oral arguments. So once again, we were in front of an entire day of having lawyers again make arguments to the PUC members. We had rebuttal, and it went on for about 7 hours. And then on the second day, the PUC deliberated all the findings. So no formal presentation by us, just more of a question and answer period. For those of us in the industry, it was absolutely riveting because it was one of the most complicated and unique cases in the country. A lot of people were watching it, as it really was the first time solar had been bid directly head-to-head with a fossil fuel resource. What we've seen in the past is they usually have a wind RFP, so you bid wind, and then you have a solar RFP, and you bid solar. But never were they directly compared head-to-head in the same request for proposals. So it was a big deal. So the decision, the PUC continued with the judge's thoughts on recommending Geronimo's distributed solar proposal to proceed to PPA negotiations. Sorry to spell out PPA. PPA is power purchase agreement negotiations. They found that our pricing was competitive with natural gas, and it was in the public interest and consistent with state policy objectives. So, again, they found that we helped to meet our renewable energy goals, promoting greenhouse gas reductions, and they found value in this distributed generation, geographic diversity, line loss, and transmission capacity. So that was 2 weeks ago. They also said that the PUC may come back, approve one of the gas plants to proceed. They kind of left that question open as to whether or not they choose any or many. So they have not made a formal decision. And essentially, they're looking for flexibility in in-service dates as they look into the future. Our project is proposed to come online by December of 2016. And so they're going to be making decisions about when, if any, additional resources they need to bring on, probably in the 2019 timeframe. So the only one that essentially didn't go forward was the Great River Energy proposal, which was the paper only. They found that to be, the PUC found that to be just not a good option for the long run. They wanted more of a permanent fix, not a short-term fix that would just leave them in a similar situation in a few years. So, what does it all mean? And I just bring this quote up from the Judge Littman, and I'll read it here. Since 1991, Minnesota has had a statutory preference in favor of renewable energy sources. Yet that preference is overridden when non-renewable source has a lower total cost. Notwithstanding the statutory preference, it seemed that non-renewable energy sources always won the head-to-head cost comparisons. Not anymore, underscored. This is on our wall, and this means a lot to anyone that's in favor of more renewable energy. It's a very big deal. I think the judge correctly recognized kind of the historic nature of what was happening in the market. So what it means to the energy industry, the competitive resource acquisition process, which is essentially a fancy name for a RFP, by allowing all of these resources to bid in one RFP, in one process, it really kind of leveled the playing field and allowed, especially renewable developers, to make arguments that couldn't be overridden just by a staff for whatever whatever particular reason. You really had to prove your case in terms of justifying why or why not your project had value. In terms of bringing transparency, we loved it because we presented our argument, and it was up to other parties to prove us wrong or prove our facts wrong. So I think the key here is I think I have it on my next slide actually. The old model for acquiring new power plants, when you're doing planning as a utility, you'd always start with demand side management, which is conservation. Do whatever you can to save first. Saver switches on air conditioners, things like that are just the cheapest form of energy reduction. Then you'd go to look to what do you need to do to fulfill your state law requirements, which are usually renewable portfolio standards. So you go buy wind because you were forced to, or buy solar because you were forced to. And then in the end, you'd backfill with traditional fossil fuel resources. That's kind of the way we've been operating for quite a while. In the new model, we're still going to focus on demand side management because we all know that's still the cheapest form of energy conservation and generation. It's just the cheapest thing we can do to not build new power plants. But then we're going to have this other process that's going to be, I think, a little different moving forward, where we're going to look to see what's the most economical mix, and they're going to be considering, the renewable side of things, the fuel cost, the environmental pollution side. So I think you'll see a lot more kind of combined mix processes of different types of power plants. It'll be interesting, if we ever get to a point where some of our large coal plants are shut down, how that transpires. I think you'll see requests for large generations to get a lot more specific in their writing in terms of what they need. But all in all, it's a very good thing for renewables to be allowed to compete in this all resources RFP. The other thing that I think Daryl brought up actually is the ancillary service market is kind of the third wheel of the energy markets, which is things like storage, voltage control. I think you're going to see a market for those types of things improve, and you'll see actually developers like ourselves going to market to provide backup to the grid. As we move towards a more dynamic grid with a lot more intermittent resources like wind and solar, the ancillary services become more valuable, and I think you'll see a market for that. And I think that's a good thing for all of us because there's a lot of benefit to battery storage and things like any time of storage, really, and learning how we can operate the grid more efficiently and more effectively with more renewables on the grid. So, kind of been rambling for a while, but I am taking questions.
Do you think you could have competed without the federal tax credit?
I think that may have pushed us out. It's in other regions of the U.S. They're getting close to not needing it, but I mean, right now it is a significant portion of our CapEx or capital cost reduction. So,
with the ancillary services opportunity, how do you see that playing into MISO versus, say, other transmission operators like PJM, that was pretty advanced? Yeah, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, MISO just doesn't do a lot of that yet, whereas PJM is starting to do that much more aggressively. So I think you're just seeing, what's the future of MISO in PJM and in Cal ISO. So not sure I answered your question, but PJM is definitely more advanced in terms of offering those types of opportunities. But completely different market. PJM is just another grid on the East Coast. So it's essentially the power grid from Ohio east.
I was wondering how forthright Excel was in helping you determine where to strategically place these different systems. So you'd have to have some sort of knowledge about the distribution, right? And how did you apply that?
We did it internally, and we used, we buy access to, there's different data sources out there on the transmissions, like Ventex and essentially big data services that you can have list of power plants, list of substations, list of things like that. So we essentially analyzed the grid internally to figure out where those particular sweet spots on the grid could be. So it's not rocket science, but it is something you need to know how to do, and you need to have someone that knows what they're looking at in terms of identifying locations.
You can get those resources because you've got a very deep pockets. They're expensive.
Yeah, it's not cheap. Yeah, the load. I mean, all those. They're all. I mean, you're paying for a service, and they have people that go out and collect data. Yeah, that's part of the. Unfortunately, part of the system. So.
Who actually is going to build the project?
So we will. It's a good question. That's pretty much undetermined at this point. We'll take it to market, and ownership is a unique. I mean, all power plants have usually a group of investors. So typically, you're going to have a tax equity investor. So it'll be one of the major Wall Street banks that purchases the tax credits, and they become a part owner. And then you have someone else like our parent company, Enel, that will put up the kind of the cash side of the project. So it's a good chance it'll be our parent company.
Good chance you'll continue to own it in the future.
Yeah, but all power plants have many owners, is what I'm getting at. They're to put up $250 plus to $1 billion on some of the wind farms, you need a lot of people. invest. So pension funds are people that buy, we're talking about institutional investors that put their money into projects that want a long-term project. So.
Is there any chance that the DEC could come back and ask for more than 100 megawatts to be supplied with solar?
I doubt it for this particular RFP. I mean, they didn't specifically ask for solar in this RFP. They said anything, you can bid anything. And currently Excel has another RFP on the street for 150 megawatts of additional solar. I think they're supposed to publish it on the 15th of this month. So I think you'll see more solar coming.
In the finance part, will the SRECs address the ownership of the SRECs?
The ownerships of XRES will go to Excel. That was part of our offer. So.
How much do you see, or the cost of the carbon, you mentioned you expect it to rise significantly. Compared to what was used in the value of solar, this is how low cost of carbon in there. How close were you to that value?
We were. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that the model currently uses a number that's substantially lower than the value of solar. So if it had been something that, if we had used the social cost of carbon at federal level, it would just make our bid look even better.
So worth it. Okay.
Yeah.
For how many years is this DOE one with the PUC?
It was proposed as a 20-year contract, so it's a 20-year power purchase agreement starting in 2016.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I assume that right now anything generated by solar is bought by the utility or used by the homeowner and the utility. But that's like your first use it, if it's made by solar, you use it, and then you supplement it with coal or gas or something.
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's essentially a day-ahead market in the wholesale power transaction, and everybody bids. So if you own a solar plant or a wind plant, how do I describe this? So say if they project they need 1,000 megawatts tomorrow, they will go out to the market and say, what's your price for tomorrow to provide power? And if you own a renewable power plant, you bid almost zero because you want to make sure your power plant is picked. And then everybody else that has fuel costs starts bidding it up from zero. So you'll have whatever 30. Coal comes in at $40, and then a new plant comes in at 60, and then some old diesel generator will bid 80. And if they start stacking up all the bids until they hit 1,000 megawatts of need, and that sets the clearing price for tomorrow. Sets a clearing price, so then everybody gets paid.
So, and I assume in all this, the judges' calculations and so forth, they assume you were going to use all the energy made by your solar plant, even on cooler days or whatever. But the gas generator is only going to be turned on 7% of the time at the very peak, most peak times. So if the gas generator had been allowed to operate day and night or much more, it would have been more economical.
It could, yeah, but they don't. A CT turbine is just generally designed to be that type of unit that you turn on a few times. The combined cycle power plant, that is something they run more frequently, and they have a lower operating cost, but they have a higher capital cost. So you spend more money to build the power plant.
They're not constrained to 7%. That's just up to.
That's just historical.
They could bid more.
Yeah.
Since you kind of changed the rules of solar development, do you see it having any impact on lower smaller projects, dollar opportunities for people developing smaller projects?
I mean, in the general sense, I think it just sent a message to the market that they can't just ignore solar in this region. I mean, it's already happened in the Southwest where it's price competitive, and this is just kind of the first time. But it very much surprised people that it happened here in Minnesota this early. I can tell you that without a doubt. And a lot of it's things you don't really think about. If you think about how long our summer days are compared to how long the summer day is in the south, solar plants in the south are shutting off when the sun sets, which is 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at best in some of the southern regions. So they actually have a harder problem keep staying with the peak than we do up here because we have really long summer days. So just all these little pieces kind of added into that made this the perfect opportunity for us as a company to bid into it. But I think it will trickle down because I think we've seen all over the world really that as soon as you start deploying more and more solar, the costs just go down and down and down and down, and your supply chain gets better, your installation gets more efficient. It has ramifications for all of us. So, beyond that policy-wise, it's hard to say how that's going to all play out.
Do you guys have any stipulations on the contractors and people that are going to be installing the local or Minnesota or?
We do not, no. But most stuff is procured. We looked at supply chain. You look most everything. Modules. Obviously, there's still a price advantage out of China with the tariff and things like that. I'm not sure where that'll go. To be honest with you. We can't even get price quotes right now because of the tariff issue, and they're telling us to wait 6 months before coming back. For those of you who don't know, there's a trade dispute between solar module manufacturers from overseas and from the U.S. So we're kind of waiting for that to follow up. But pretty much everything else, you got inverters, racking, wire, the steel, all that's U.S. So I always tell people that the module is the big shiny thing that and it's important, but there's also a lot of other pieces that go into the plant, local labor and all the other components. So it's more than the panel.
You a private company or?
We're a private company.
You're a private company and a parent company?
Parent company is traded on Milan Stock Exchange.
You had to put a bid into the rescinding process.
Yep.
Yeah, you still have to come with EPA to accelerate.
Yes, that's the next step. We've done this quite a few times in the past where, like on the last wind RFP, we were selected for 2 wind farms, and then the next step is to go through the power purchase agreement process. So it's a fairly typical step in the process. You go back, make sure that it's protecting ratepayers, gives everyone adequate protections, and file it for the PUC. Yes, that is the next step. And then I can tell you a little about the permitting if you're interested. The state will then be submitting for a site permit. There's actually some legislation going through to clarify the rules around this project as well on how it will get treated, but essentially the state will have siting authority, so we'll be going through the environmental review process with the DNR and all the EPA and all the other vested interests that have review of projects. So that'll take, we're hoping to have that permit filed by July 1st, and then we'll probably go through 6 to 8 months of permitting process. So it takes a while.
I presume that you are involved with the effort to try to aggregate small projects into a single large project from a permitting standpoint. Is that true?
Yes. Yep.
And what's their motivation? Why are you interested in that?
It's clarifying the rules really. It's our project, because it's over 50 megawatts. Any power plant over 50 megawatts is deemed to have state control or the state has siting authority for anything over 50. This is kind of a weird animal with it being broken up. But as a collective action, it's one power purchase agreement contract. It's one approval from our perspective. So I don't know if I answered your question.
So it would be preferable to you to have a single statewide permit rather than individual permits for each of those sites?
It is, and it's primarily because of financing. We have to have we're having a single PPA with a single permit. So if you have 32 permits, and it becomes unruly from a to take to a bank to get financed in terms of just due diligence and everything else. So. But yeah, you're right. I think if collectively, if all these projects were done by themselves, it'd all be local permitting. But we're to that end. I don't know why you're asking, but we have been to not everyone, but most of the communities and met with them and introduced it and talked with them. We got, I think, 18 letters of support from our jurisdictions.
But as large as the megawatts, power plant siting would take place by the state.
Yep, that's current rules.
And that has to be more.
It's certainly preferred from our standpoint. I don't know if it's more efficient because it's expensive. It's a lot more involved from a process. You have to do a lot more work to get through all the agencies, but so yes, in one way it's more efficient because you have one permit, and then it's not because there's a lot more involvement by more agencies.
Is there a fixed number of sites within the room for expansion, or is it within that?
We have currently 24 or 25 sites, and there are extra sites, knowing that as we go through the state siting process that some of those will be weeded out for environmental or cultural resource reasons, or the grid itself turns out that we were wrong in our projections in terms of being able to handle power. So the whole proposal was designed to be flexible and be able to either ramp down or ramp up a particular site. So we're not adding more.
Yeah, 71%, was that everything altogether, or did those 25 plans have plus and minus, and 71 was an average?
71 is just an average. You will find a little bit different throughout the state in terms of resource. And those of you that are in the solar industry, we're assuming a DC to AC ratio of at least 1.3. So it's really 130 megawatts that if you're used to DC watts. And we just constrain it back to get the higher rating on the interconnection.
Are you going to orient south, or are you going to do trackers?
These are trackers, so it's linear axis tracker, just like St. John's. If you've been there, and that's really to get that afternoon accreditation. That's what we're doing. Yeah.
And determining who is the winner, did you get any kind of credits like the effective load carrying capacity, or you mentioned carbon?
Yeah, the LCC is another way of getting to the 71% number. So that's yeah, but just so it's the DC side that matters. So it confuses the heck out of people. But if you use a linear axis tracker, it's around 55% of its DC nameplate is the accredited number. So I know you don't.
We got time for one more question. Anybody else? We have enough? Everybody?
How big was the party after
it was one of those celebrate for one evening, and we are now currently doing soil borings, civil engineering, wetland delineations, environmental review, ALTA surveys. I mean, it's go time before the crops go in. Yeah, so we had it all kind of teed up. It's one of those things where you had to have it. We had contracts bid out for the borings to get out in the field, but you couldn't let them go until you had it. But you knew if you didn't have it ready, the corn to be planted, and we've paid crop damages, and you don't want to do it. It's really expensive. So it's now a lot of work to do. So.
All right, let's give it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.